Hey everybody, Bill Sky, the Database Guy, and we're back with another database design video. And on this one, we're going to do something pretty detailed. One of the things I just love to do was to go to domain experts, find out how they did their job, how business was run, how the science was done, no matter what it was. I just loved going to them and interviewing them and finding out exactly how I can create a database to support whatever it is that they're doing. And I would learn so much about the subject matter that I was talking to them about. It really gave me a lot of knowledge. And that's really what I want to impart upon you, is how joyous or how much fun it can be to learn so much about so many different disciplines while you're doing something you love, which is like designing a database. So I thought about this for a while, a couple weeks actually. And what I decided was I'm going to show you how to design a database to support a real estate agent. I know, blah, yawn. But you know something? Companies have made millions of dollars or billions of dollars on applications like this, and it's a great way to actually see how I went about finding information out about a subject, maybe even before I went to a domain expert. So I haven't actually done this yet. This is going to be live. We're going to do it. Again, I've thought about it for a while, but I actually haven't looked into it. So we're going to do this together. We're going to design a database, and we're going to do it about real estate agents, what it takes to run a real estate agent agency, or even just an independent real estate agent. We'll see as we're getting through into the design. And you'll see how I found the information and how I decided to design the database. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to do this using MySQL Workbench. Now you can do this using any type of a tool. dbeaver Community Edition is really, really nice for doing database modeling. I may have a video on that later on in another video in this series, but we're going to use MySQL Workbench. Now, that doesn't mean that you must use MySQL. You can use Postgres, you can use DB2, you can use Microsoft SQL Server. You can even use something like Mongo Database, but it's always a good idea to design your database. And if you look at my first video on how to set up a very superficial or a very initial database design, you'll see what I mean by that. But we're going to go ahead and use my MySQL Workbench. Now I'm going to start up MySQL Workbench, but I'm not going to actually start using it just yet. I'm going to actually look into what it is to be a real estate agent. And again, as I said earlier, I haven't actually done this yet, so this is going to be brand new. I've never written a database for a real estate agent. So let's go ahead and do this together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up my browser. Now I'm doing this in Linux. It doesn't matter what operating system you do this in. I'm doing it in Linux just because it's faster, and I'm using VMware as a guest operating system here. So I'm just going to ask the simple question: what does a real estate agent do? Now you can see other people have had that question before. Probably they're looking for a new career or something like that. But it's a great question to ask. So okay, this is actually really great here. What Google's coming back. It's telling me that now if you look, these are all what I like to call in database lingo verbs. These are all things that the real estate agent does. They negotiate, they close on a property, they set up a mortgage application, they have open houses, they produce or they review home inspection reports. So these are all verbs. And if you remember, if you watched my previous video, which there's a link in the description of this video on, I talk about relationships. So in database lingo, a verb is a relationship. So when somebody does something, that creates a relationship. So there's another one called nouns, and a noun is an entity that you would actually model in a database. You would do that with relationships too, but a noun is really where you get started. What are the things that actually exist, not as verbs, but as nouns, as objects? So let's go ahead and say, so here's one, Patelco, and again, I have nothing to do with any of these companies. I'm just kind of investigating on the internet what a real estate agent does. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to scan this document and I'm going to look for nouns. Now I have my MySQL workbench sitting right here. I'm going to go ahead and open up my local instance of MySQL. And I'm going to go over to schemas. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say File. Let's see. Schemas. Let's see what we got here. Create a new schema. So I'm going to click on the Create a new schema. And I'm going to call this Real Estate. I'm going to leave everything the same, or by default. It's going to create the schema Real Estate. Now this is going to be, if you remember in my previous video, if you watched it, a schema in MySQL terminology is a database. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to say execute it. And there's my Real Estate schema. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go into there. Now, before I actually do anything with this schema, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say File, New Model. Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger. All right, and I'm going to double click on Add Diagram. And so we have our diagram here. Now I did a little bit of this in my previous video, so I'm going to go through this rather quickly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at every noun in that document that I found on the internet, and I'm going to create a table that represents that noun. And that's the first thing that you do to get started. Okay, so a real estate agent can assist the buyer to purchase a transaction by finding suitable properties. Okay, so remember, a real estate agent does more than just sell houses. They could sell a barn. They could sell just vacant land. They could sell, an entire building. They could sell an entire block of a city if they're represented to do that. So I think this is perfect. So this first one right here, this first bullet, it's got a lot of nouns in it. It's got property. It's got a buyer. There's preferences. I'm not sure if that's gonna make it. So, it's also got, the second one also has agent. So those are all nouns that we're going to add to our design. So let's start off with property. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a table. I'm going to click on this table. Now it says quick key press T. I'm going to do that again. Now it's what's weird is oh, here we go. This window right here kind of hid from it. Okay. So, and I'm going to just click. All right, so I'm going to double click on that, and down here's the table. So we found, the very first noun we found was property. So that's going to be the name of our first table. Now the next question is what is a key, or what is a way to uniquely identify a property? Well, we could use an address. You could use, but the problem with using the address as a key is that it's all text. It can be a problem being unique. There might be multiple buildings on the same address that you're selling. You might have an entire block. So, the key of address may not be a good one. Now, address is definitely going to be an attribute that we're going to add to the table, a column, but I'm not really sure that address is the correct thing we want to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a column just called property ID, and I'm just going to leave it as an integer, and I'm going to make it a primary key, not null. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So there's our property key. Now I'm not setting up the tables to be 100% complete here. I'm just throwing things together. Okay. So we've got a property noun that we've created into a table. Now we've got buyer. Okay, so let's go ahead and create another table. And this one we're going to call buyer. And buyer is a pretty good one. But thinking about it, you're going to have a buyer, but you're also going to probably have a seller. So I'm going to create another one. Now some of these tables might actually change as we're doing this. So let me go back to this table right here. You got to make sure we got a buyer. So now we have a buyer and a seller. Okay, so we've got a property, a buyer, and a seller. Now you could argue that buyer and seller are human beings. They could be corporations though, right? So you might be selling to a corporation but buying from an individual. There's all kinds of things you have to think about here, but let's leave them as separate entities for right now. Remember, a noun is a table. Okay. You've got preferences and budget. Budget is probably something that would be an attribute of the buyer. So let's actually do that. I'm going to go into buyer and I'm going to create a column. Now, the first thing I always like to do is to come up with what is the primary key of the buyer. Now, the primary key could be something that uniquely identifies. It could be like Social Security number. What's the problem with Social Security number? Well, you're limiting yourself to only U.S. buyers, because people from internationally that might want to buy something in the United States, for instance, or somebody in the United States might want to buy something internationally, they may not have a Social Security number. So Social Security number may not be a good idea for this. I'm trying to come up with something unique. I'm going to call this buyer ID. Now, you don't always want to create your own key, just like buyer ID, but in this case, we're going to do that because I think it makes a lot of sense. Okay. And then seller, I think seller is the same thing. I think you're going to have a seller ID. And we want to make sure the primary key and not null are clicked. Okay. Now, there is something else here. There's a thing that you might have. You want their name, you want their address. We're going to get into that later. But for right now, those are our entities. Those are our tables. Those are our nouns. Okay. Oh, and they might have a budget. That's what we were talking about. So the buyer might have a budget. So let's go ahead and add, and let's make sure we're in, let's make sure we're in buyer. And down here, I'm just going to put max budget, because that's something we saw in that as an attribute in that document. Now we want to pick the correct size, so I'm just going to click decimal right there. I'm just going to make that a decimal. And unfortunately, it looks like MySQL isn't going to let me do that. So let's go find varchar. And let's just say budget of 6, 2. Or is it .2? Or is 6? Let's just leave it at 6. Okay. So you're going to talk about data types later on, but for right now, we're just trying to convert what we have found in our research into some type of a database design. Remember, I haven't done this before, so we're kind of doing this from scratch here. Okay. Negotiating the best price. So price is another noun, but you're not going to want to make price be a table. A price is like budget. A price is going to be like the attribute. So a property is going to have a price. Now, I have done some purchasing and selling of real estate in the past, and I think what we want to do here is we're going to have a couple of prices. We're going to have a price max, and we're going to make this a decimal 6. Or just decimal. We can just say decimal, I believe. We're going to say price min maybe. And let's just make it a decimal. There we go. Okay, so you see how we're slowly building up our table. We're slowly building up our design. And you could do something like this for MongoDB as well. In fact, you really should. Figure out how your data is going to be structured, how it's going to be designed. Okay. Now, something else comes to mind, that there's some type of notice that little character that came up there. You want to get rid of those weird little characters. I accidentally pressed the key to the left of my number 1 key. So anyway, so we have property ID, price max, price minimum. I mean, while we're here, we might want to say what city is it in. And the city, let's just make it a varchar of I don't know, 24. So it must be in a city, so we might want to say not null for that. We might also want to say not null for the maximum price or the minimum price. Now, that might not be a good idea. You might not want to make those null, not null, because let's say you find a property that, let's say somebody passed away and you're trying to sell that property, but you don't know what the owners or the people that survived the person that passed away, what their minimum or maximum price is. You still want to be able to add it to the database, but you don't know. And if you don't know and you make these not null, you can't add them to the database. So those are two values that I think you need to leave as they can be null. Okay, so we have city. One other one, let's say zip code. And let's just make that an int. Okay. All right, great. So we're getting on here. Now, one thing we haven't taken into account is some of the addressing schemas and zip codes and things like that for international properties. Again, that's something that we can research. That's just another. I should be writing this stuff down. These are to-dos that I need to look into. And actually, I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to start up a little editor here, and I'm going to create a document, and I'm going to say real estate database design to-dos. And let's make it kind of formal here. And I'm going to say research property addresses internationally. Now, when I write that down, there's much more to it than just that one line. Do I want to do it in the Asian countries? Do I want to do it in just Europe? Are there differences? These are all things that you really have to look into. Maybe I just want to do it in the United States, but I'm really limiting my ability on what I can sell. So international real estate can be very, very lucrative. So these are things that you want to think about. Okay, so that's my to-do list. All right, so let's go back to our document. So there's a price, terms. That sounds like a verb to me. I also see the word agent. Ooh, that's interesting. So terms, real estate terms, very interesting. They might be shared by multiple sellers. They might be shared by multiple buyers that I want cash only. Maybe that could be an attribute in the property. I think that might be a table of its own. But the one that I want to create is agent. I want to have an entity or a table on agents. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that, and I'm going to say agent. And from within there, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna say agent ID, just because it's an easy way to do it. I'm gonna say first name, last name. Let's say oh, wait a minute, company. Maybe it's a real estate firm that has multiple agents. Oops, I'm not sure I want to go ahead and put the company in there just yet. In fact, company might be yet another entity. Let's go ahead and throw it in there. So I'm going to say real estate firm. All right, let's put in real estate firm ID, and let's just leave it that way for now. Okay. A lot of entities that we're creating here. That's awesome. All right, we're learning about the real estate. Preparing and reviewing purchase contracts. Contracts and legal documents. Well, those are two entities there. So let's go ahead and I'm going to say I'm going to create an entity called contract. I'm going to create another entity. Legal documents. Maybe we don't want to make these separate entities. Maybe instead of contract, we just want to say documents. Okay. And for this one, I'm almost positive you're going to have some type of a document ID. Also notice that I'm calling all of my IDs basically the same thing. I've got property underscore ID, seller ID, buyer ID, agent ID. I'm not sure what this is. Oh, ref ID? I did that. Oh, yeah, real estate firm. See, I didn't get that right. So real estate firm ID, because I didn't name it well. I'm not sure. What is ref ID? And then document ID. Okay, great. We've just gotten started here. So we're going to combine contracts and documents. Now we can always separate those out later on because we're just doing a design right now. Now, if you did this in the actual database, oh, what a headache it would be to combine those or separate them later on. That's why we want to do the design. Inspections, that sounds like a verb. Appraisals is a verb. Yeah, these are all verbs right here. Cooperation between the buyer and the seller, we already have those. The lender, the lender. So we have another noun. So let's go ahead and create the lender table. And let's go ahead and create a simple key, lender ID. We're going to put, just so I can see it, lender name there. You could do the same thing with all of these. I could go ahead and just put firm name. And we don't really have anything. We could do that in seller and buyer too. So, but the important thing to do is when you initially set this up, I should say, you want to just have the primary keys in there. Very, very important. Okay, so we've got a lender during the transaction, escrow agent. Ooh, agent. Well, we could put that in with this agent and put some type of a thing here, like agent type. So I could create an agent type. And from the agent type, we could actually select specific values. So you could make it, I don't know, you could make it something like an integer. You could make it in such a way where the foreign key is the actual type identifier. Oh wow, this is getting interesting. Okay, let's get rid of this agent type for now. Okay. And I'm thinking about making something, and I'll show you an example of this. I'm thinking about making something like participant. Let's say I create a table, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in just a moment. Participant. Or maybe we call it a transaction participant, and from within there, I would create a column name called participant. Oh, sorry if you don't get that type. And we're going to make that into a char. And let's see if we can do just a standard char here. There it is right there. So I'm going to say char 12. Okay, so what is a participant type? A participant type would be like the seller, the buyer. Oh, this is interesting. Buyer and seller are really almost the same type. They're going to have name, they're going to have address, they're going to have phone number. Maybe we can merge those in together, and then when the data's in the actual table, we could say that that particular row in the table is a participant type of buyer, is a participant type of seller. Very interesting idea there. I'm going to go ahead and put a description. You know, it's kind of like you've got stores, right? So you might have, and this has nothing to do with real estate, but you might be creating a table called stores, and inside of the store, you want to know what type of a store is it. Is it a fishing store? Is it a hardware store? And instead of having to type that information in on every single one, you simply point to a description table like this participant thing. We'll see how that works out. And let's go ahead and put that rather large. Let's make that 80 characters. Okay. So again, we're just designing this. We're not actually doing anything, implementing anything yet. All right. So we've got, so we've got the escrow agent. So we were talking resolving any issues that may be during transaction, accompanying the buyer to the closing and ensuring a smooth transfer. Okay, this looks pretty good. As I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what are the things that I had to deal with when I was buying and selling real estate? I wasn't a real estate mogul or anything. I've just built and bought a number of houses and sold them and bought them in my life. This looks really, really good. We've got documents. I'm not sure about participants. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm going to kind of move that over here. but we actually have a very good start here. All right. So those are all of our nouns. Now, the thing that I want to do is I want to move that template out of there. Let's get rid of that. Okay. Now, in this model design, you're going to see this line right here. That means that that's the end of the 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. So if you want to make that bigger, you can do that. But for but normally you'll do this and you'll print it and you'll show it to somebody for their evaluation. The other thing you can do is you can say File, Page Setup in MySQL Workbench. And I'm going to go in, instead of A4, I'm going to select Custom. And I'm going to give it a really big 40 inches by 40 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and apply. And that didn't really work out very well, did it? Let's go ahead and say Page Setup again. Oh, and I didn't give it a name, so I'm going to give it a name, Big Area. And I'm going to select, let's see if it shows up here. Yep, Big Sheet right there, and apply. And for some reason that line didn't go away. I'm not sure why. But anyway, you can make it much bigger, and that way you don't have this strange line right there. But that's all that line is for. Okay. And again, I'm not sure why that didn't go away. All right. So now we've got our entities that came from the nouns. Now let's take a look at the verbs. So finding a suitable property that matches the buyer's needs, preference. That might be a verb, finding suitable properties, but that's not necessarily something that a real estate agent wants to reflect in a database. It's the agent's job, right? I want to find a property. Then when they find the property, they then log it into their property table. So maybe that's not a very good verb. Negotiating the best price, that's kind of the same thing as finding a suitable property. Preparing and reviewing the purchase contracts, coordinating inspections, appraisals. Yeah, this is a little bit difficult. Let's go ahead and take a look at our nouns and see if we can come up with some verbs. Well, first of all, when somebody wants to sell a property, that the seller sells the property, right? That's a verb. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a relationship between property and seller that says that this seller is going to sell this property. And multiple properties can be sold by the same seller. Multiple sellers can't sell the same property. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You can't have 10 sellers claim that this property is something they're going to sell. You might have a seller group. Ooh, that's interesting. A group of sellers that want to sell this. They all own it. So maybe seller, we need to do something with seller, like they have a participant who is part of the seller group. But for right now, let's just say that one seller can sell many properties, and one property can't be sold by multiple sellers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pick this 1:n with the dotted line. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on the property, and I'm going to click on seller. Now, what happened here? We just created a relationship between seller and property that says one seller, and you can see that there's not multiple fingers coming out of this part of the line. One seller is selling multiple properties. Also, look at what happened right here. We have a seller ID that showed up at the bottom of the table. If I double click on the property table, you're now going to see, and let me try to move this up here, you're going to see the seller ID has now become a column inside a property. So we know that a certain property is owned by who? It's owned by the seller. Okay, it used to be that you could click on that. So I'm going to put it down here in comments. A single seller can sell multiple properties. Okay. Okay, so that's what we're going to have there. Now, I'm not really crazy about the fact that I can't let me see if there's a text object. Okay, let's create a new text object here and put that right there. Now, a text object is not something that is going to be reflected in the database design when we implement it. It's just there for the design. A seller can sell multiple properties. And there we go. So now we've got our comment there. So it's really nice for documentation. Okay. Now let's take a look at buyer. A buyer can buy multiple properties. Can a property be bought by multiple buyers? Let's stay away from that right now. So we're going to say a buyer can buy multiple properties. So I'm going to go over here and create a text object and put that right there. All right. Great, wonderful. We're getting there. We're learning the. I haven't played with MySQL Workbench for a while, but it's free. But it does have some little caveats. But it seems to work pretty good. So a single buyer can buy multiple properties. So we're documenting our design as we're going along. Now, agent. This is interesting. What are one of the verbs? An agent represents a seller, and an agent represents a buyer, right? Now we're going to put these documents over here because I think there's, well, before we do the agent, seller, and buyer, we're going to say that a real estate firm contains many agents. So I'm going to create a one-to-many relationship there. And I'm not going to put comments there for now. It's always a good idea to do that, but I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. And then an agent represents a seller and a buyer. Now, an agent can represent multiple sellers. An agent can represent multiple buyers. So there's a one-to-many relationship there. A buyer could be represented by multiple agents. I'm not really sure how that would work. So let's just stick with one-to-many right now. An agent represents multiple sellers. And an agent represents multiple buyers. So we can see how our design is really coming along here. Now, I just mentioned I had in my mind here, can a buyer be represented by multiple agents? So I'm going to put in my questions. Can a buyer be represented by multiple agents? And I think it's the same thing with seller, right? Can a seller? These are like to-dos. These are things I have to ask the domain experts about. Can a seller be represented by multiple agents? Now, some of you watching this might be like, oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, I don't know that, so I'm documenting it right there. Okay, so our design is coming right along. Okay. Now we have a lender. Well, I don't think a buyer. Oh, notice that the comments, you have to move the comments around. That's one thing I don't like about this design product. Anyway, so we just move that around. Okay, so I don't think a seller deals with the lender, but I think the buyer does. So I think it would be a buyer, and a buyer can be represented by multiple lenders. That's kind of weird, right? If you're a buyer and you have multiple lenders, is that normally how it works? No, normally, and to verify this, I would contact a bank or I would contact a real estate agent and find out. But I think it's a buyer can only have one lender. A lender can only have, you can't have multiple lenders on the same property. But a lender can have multiple buyers. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a one-to-many between buyer and lender. So you can see how a lender can have multiple buyers. Now a lender, like I said, a lender-seller really doesn't have anything. I don't see a lender-seller relationship there. There might be, but I don't see one there. So in a real estate firm, let's make sure. Oh, yep. So a real estate firm can have multiple agents. Wow, this is great. Okay. Now, documents. What kind of a relationship is there with documents? Is there a does an agent have a document? Does a seller or a buyer have a document? I would probably be willing to bet that the documents are not related to the agent. The documents are not related to the seller. The documents are related to the property. And why do I say that? Because if the property didn't exist, would there be any documents regarding the sale? No. If the agent didn't exist, would there be any documents for the sale? Yes. Because let's say you're selling it yourself. So the seller is selling it themselves, and they're selling it to a buyer, but they're not using an agent. But that document may still exist. The termite inspection document, the escrow document, the loan document, those will still exist. Should a document be associated with a buyer only? Well, the buyer might want to see a termite inspection document, and the seller doesn't. See, those are all part of property. So, and arguably, that's just how I'm seeing it right now. So a property will have multiple documents. And this way, there's really no ownership of the document by any one individual. It's owned by the property. The agent can get to it because the agent has a relationship with the seller. The seller has a relationship with the property. Oh, something else that's interesting is that we didn't create a relationship between agent and property. So let's go ahead and do a one-to-many there. An agent has multiple properties that they are selling. Okay, so this is getting really interesting. Now, one nice thing about using this design tool is that it's creating the columns within the tables as we create the entities, or as we create the relationships. Okay. Now, as we're doing this, I'm kind of thinking, well, do we really want, as I'm seeing different foreign keys going into these entities or to represent the relationships, I don't think we need to merge seller and buyer. I think they're different enough where we keep them separate because the seller doesn't have a lender. And I think writing code, if they were merged, might be a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the participant entity. I don't think we need the participant entity. Okay. Now, there might be some other entities. You might have an entity, as I'm thinking about this, the documents, you might have a law firm. So maybe you have an entity called legal representative. You know, this is definitely something I would contact a real estate agent about. Legal rep. You might have, and again, it's always a good idea to create some kind of a primary key just so we can connect them via relationships. Legal rep, you might also want to have one called government rep. And let's make sure we get that strange little character out of there. And let's create an ID for them. Okay. So why did I put those there? Well, because a lot of these documents are part of you need a legal representative, you need a government representative. Again, I'm just brainstorming here. Also, the lender is going to have multiple documents. So I think we want to, and we know that for a fact, right? So a lender is going to have multiple documents. Government representative or organization, maybe we change that. Maybe instead of representative, we say government org. I think that might be better. Okay. And a government organization is going to have multiple documents that it's going to be dealing with. I'm not really sure about the legal rep, so let's go ahead and move that over here onto the side. All right. Wow, look at this. This has really gotten interesting. So right now we have a database design that could actually be implemented. Now there's not enough information in here. Now that we kind of have an idea about the tables, now we need to fill in the blanks. Like for instance, under seller, we're gonna want to go into columns, and we're gonna want to start adding new columns. So I'm gonna call this seller first name. Oops. Seller last name. You don't really need the seller in there. Let's just go ahead and it's also a really good idea to keep these column names consistent. So notice over here on agent we have first name and last name in camel case, which means that the first character of each word is uppercase. So we're going to keep that's consistent. Now why? Why keep that consistent? Because the reason is because then the programmers, when they're programming the database, or even people that are just issuing queries against the database, they can just go in there and they know that the first name is always going to be capital F first, capital N AIM, first name. So we're just going to keep that. We might need to have an email. And let's call this email 1. We might even have a phone number. Now for phone number, you might want to make it something bigger. Was it 4, 5, 8, 9, 10? And you're probably going to want to include these also in, well, not probably, you're going to want to. You're going to want to include those in buyer. So we have to move our, for free, this is a pretty neat tool. Okay. So as we think about these things, we want to do them as we think about them. So let's go into buyer. And we need the first name. Last name. Email 1. Why have email 1? Well, there might be an email 2. So it doesn't, and you can do the same thing with phone number. Okay, there we go. All right, so things are beginning to look more usable, or more completed, I should say. Okay. So you just want to start filling all that stuff out. Now, agent, pretty much the same thing, right? First name, you might want to have email in there. Believe it or not, a lot of real estate agents still uses fax numbers. You have a fax number there, pretty good. And notice how I'm redrawing every once in a while to make sure that my diagram doesn't get out of control and I forget where I was. And I'm doing things, I'm trying to do things common. So when I did them, when I added first name, last name, email 1, phone number to seller, I did the same thing with buyer. Property, we could add an address, but our relationships are there. Now, what would I do at this point? What I would do at this point is I would take this design and I would actually print it, or I would save it as a PDF file. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to put it in my documents, and I'm going to call this real estate DB design. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say file print. I'm going to print to a file, PDF, preview it, and that looks pretty good. So I would then take this document, I would save it as a file, as I just did, and I would go ahead and send it to a real estate contact I had, a domain expert, and say, how is this looking for your needs? How are things looking? Now, if you're working at a large company and you're designing a database, it's always a good idea to do this and send it to your manager, send it to the team leader, and say, here's, what do you think of this? What do you think of this design? There's multiple tools out there to allow you to do this type of design. And once you do it, once you get it all set up and you've sent it off to the domain experts for their corrections, you can make modifications. You have multiple people look at your work. You figure out what it is that you really need to supply your customer with, and then you've got a design that then can be forward engineered into an actual SQL database or even a Mongo database. It depends upon which database system you're using. So I hope that helped and gave you some idea of how to get started in developing a database based on a certain domain without actually talking to anybody. I actually thought what we did there was pretty good. I thought it gave us a good idea of what a real estate agent does, what all the nouns were, what all the verbs are, the relationships, and it would probably impress your manager by just throwing something like this together after doing a lot of research on the internet, maybe contacting a real estate firm, offering them maybe a lunch or something to go talk to them, or maybe a real estate agent that you used in the past. So anyway, that's the idea behind designing a database. We're going to get more into this as these videos move on. Hope to see you in our next video.